Happy Friday, everybody. So today we're talking about nuclear proliferation, and there's really two things we're going to talk about today. We're going to start by talking about what can't even say it. What proliferation means when we're talking about nuclear stuff, and then we're just going to run through some key issues in the debates surrounding nuclear proliferation. I'm going to have a tough time. I can't even say tough. I'm going to have a tough time saying that in this video. Okay, here we go. So you watched some videos already talking about sort of it's a complex thing. I mean, nuclear weapons are not like just something you make in your backyard. They're complex. So let's talk about what proliferation means. So if you break this down, obviously, to proliferate is to reproduce. And so what we mean when we say nuclear proliferation, we don't mean more nukes. What we mean is a non-nuke state getting a nuke. That is what we mean by nuclear proliferation. If the United States makes more weapons, that's really not nuclear proliferation the way we're talking about it, though that is a reasonable thing to talk about. But when we're talking about nuclear proliferation, non-proliferation, what we mean is non-nuke states getting nukes. So let's talk about very quickly who's got nukes. The first thing, the people with nukes, is the 5 permanent members of the UN. Remember what those are? Those are United States, China, Russia, France, and the UK. Those all have nuclear weapons. Who else has nuclear weapons? Well, we know that India and Pakistan have nuclear weapons. They're pointed at each other. It's a little messy. Who else has nuclear weapons? I think Iran and North Korea are trying to get them. Here's the honest truth: is North Korea probably has 1 or 2 sitting around somewhere. Another one that has them, but nobody really obviously admits, is Israel has them. They just never say that they do. That's probably it. So there's not a lot of states that have nuclear weapons. The rest are non-nuke states. So if Iran, we can still kind of leave North Korea in there. They try to get nuclear weapons. That's what we mean by nuclear proliferation. So the stages of proliferation. How do you go from being a non-nuke state to a nuke state? And the reason we're talking about this is because you don't just go from non-nuke to nuke overnight. There's a lot of steps. And if you can stop these steps, then you can stop proliferation. So let's talk about the stages. The first stage is you acquire nuclear technological expertise, like just how do you make a bomb? How do you make the machinery that's used to make the bomb? How do you make the machinery? All that kind of stuff. The technological expertise that goes into it. Now, there was a time when that would have been hard to get. Now you can just, go enroll at MIT and get that expertise. Then you create a nuclear production program. You're probably not doing this in your backyard or in your garage. This is going to require a state level thing. It's why you don't really expect like Al-Qaeda to develop a nuclear weapon. They just don't have the ability to have a nuclear production program. This is going to take space, it's going to take time, and it's going to take a lot of money. And really the only thing that can really pull this off are states and Bill Gates. Those two. So I've got a nuclear production program. Then I need the rough nuclear material. If I go out there and look for bomb grade or bomb ready nuclear material, I'm going to have a tough time finding it. I can maybe, and again, this can be strictly limited, but maybe I can get my hands on uranium, but I have to turn that uranium into bomb grade uranium. That's going to be the next part. So I have to get the material. Then once I have the material, I refine it to a weapons grade material. And that's where the centrifuges come in, the things that spin around and separate the good stuff from the bad stuff. And it takes a long time. It takes a really long time to get from rough material to the enrichment. So even if I have all this other stuff, it's going to take a while to get the material to make the bomb. Then I got to build the bomb. And it's, as you saw in that video, it's not just like, again, something I can just wire together. It requires some pretty precise technological measurements. It's going to require some people and some machines that know what they're doing. Then, now I've got this bomb. Well, do I know it works? I haven't really fired one off yet. So you have to test this thing, which means I'm going to need to build another one or 2 or 3 so I can test it to make sure that it actually does work, that all the technology I put in this actually pays off. To test it, I'm not just going to blow it up in my neighborhood. I'm going to need a place to do this underground. The U.S. and France used Pacific Islands through the 50s and 60s and 70s. Okay, so now I've got this bomb. I've tested it. Totally works. Now here's my problem. I got to get it somewhere, and that you need to develop delivery systems like long-range missiles. Otherwise, you just basically you can't really put it in a FedEx box and just send it off to the United States. It's radioactive. It will give off things. You have to get it where it needs to go, and it has to go to the right place. So that's going to be as difficult as some of this other stuff. So here's what non-proliferation means. You have all these stages of proliferation. What non-proliferation means, first of all, is to stop this process at any and every stage. You want to make sure none of these things happen, let's say, for Iran. How do you keep Iran from sort of going down that path, or Syria, or North Korea, or Indonesia? If they decide they want to do this, how can you stop these things? So, for example, can you make it hard to get your hands on rough uranium? There's only so many places to get uranium in the world, and so if you can control that marketplace, that can help that. If you can make it hard to get your hands on centrifuges, that will do that. That's another thing. So there's ways to sort of intervene in any or all of these steps. The second thing that non-proliferation means is just to make nuclear weapons an unattractive or a costly option. So if I'm going to go to all the trouble to get a nuclear weapon, that I expect there's going to be some benefit from it. But if the costs are going to outweigh the benefits, then there's really no reason for me to do that. So that's another thing that we sort of talk about with this, is that you make it very economically painful for Iran or North Korea to get a nuclear weapon, and then they do the cost-benefit analysis and say, here's all the good things I'll get with a bomb, but here's all the bad things I'll get with a bomb, so I'm not going to get the bomb. So that's what non-proliferation is, very simply. Before we move on and talk about some of the debates, we do have to ask this question about this right here, like what makes it an attractive option in the first place? So why would a state want the bomb? So think about this for a second, and I want you to think, like, why do you think a state would want the bomb? I'm pausing so you can think. So probably one of the first things you might think is, especially if you're a realist, right? When I say realism, you say, exactly. And what a nuclear weapon can do is it can get you power. So one of the first reasons you might think why a state would want the bomb is security. But then remember the security dilemma. I'm not going to explain this to you again. You guys know the security dilemma, but this is the thing. If I go ahead and get a nuclear weapon, my neighbors are going to be super nervous. So I'm getting it for my own security, but my neighbors are super nervous about it. So maybe then they want a nuclear weapon too. This happened with India and Pakistan. India developed a nuclear weapon for its own security. Pakistan, the neighbors, saw them getting this and they said, well, we need to get one too. And now you've got India and Pakistan pointing at each other. So is India safer with a nuclear weapon, or are they less safe because now Pakistan has one too? That's an interesting question. So security is one reason. Another reason is just political leverage, bargaining power. The United States says to North Korea, go away, you bother me. If North Korea has a nuclear weapon, you can't just do that anymore. You have to listen to North Korea now. You have to listen when they say this or that. So there is there's the political leverage that goes with having a nuclear weapon. There's also prestige. I mean, again, it's like getting a new car. It's like getting, something really fancy, that you are now part of the nuclear club. You've made it. You are one of the cool kids, the more advanced kids, whatever that sort of might be. And that does play a role in this. When India and Pakistan, when they got the bomb, there were huge celebrations in the sense that now we are one of the top countries in the world. We proved it by having a nuclear weapon. And then one more thing is domestic legitimacy. In other words, if you want to become popular with the people, sometimes getting a nuclear weapon is a good way of doing that. India, Pakistan, again, great examples of, as they got the nuclear weapon, their governments became more popular with their own people. All right, so there's some good reasons for getting a nuclear weapon. Now, there's some negative things that go with this, but in terms of perception, it feels like the bomb is a thing that's worth having if you can acquire it. So then we'd ask, okay, so then why? So if that's true, then how come there's only, like, what did we say, 8 states that have a nuclear weapon? So how come states don't develop the bomb? The most obvious reason, and I would just ask you this, how come Burkina Faso doesn't have a nuclear weapon? And the answer is lack of money, materials, expertise. That's going to be the case for a lot of states. Like, we're not that concerned about Burkina Faso's nuclear weapons program. Not because they're not smart. It's just they got a lot of things on their plate and there's not a lot of money to go around. So, okay, so that's going to cut a bunch of countries out of our sort of concern here. The other thing is the costs may outweigh the benefits. So here's the benefits, but there's costs. Like it's expensive to do all those things on that last slide about the stages of proliferation. Plus, if you get sanctions and things like that, as the United States and Europe and all of them get a little nervous about this, they may add costs to that to keep weighing that out. So again, maybe I don't want to get nuclear weapons. And then there's a third thing, and this is more the constructivist idea, is that if a state thinks it's wrong to have nuclear weapons, then it's not going to go ahead and get nuclear weapons. And there are definitely some states, particularly in, say, Europe, that think nuclear weapons are not just another type of weapon. They are evil, they're wrong, they're things you should not have, like chemical weapons or biological weapons and nuclear weapons. So if that's the case, then you're probably not going to develop them. Now, we can look at a couple countries, just before we move on, a couple countries that have tried to get a nuclear weapons program but have stopped. One is South Africa, another is Libya. And in both of these cases, they both had the money and materials and expertise. But one of the things they did is this right here, is that as they started the program, they just realized for a variety of reasons, the cost just outweighed the benefits, and they gave them up. Libya did so after the United States invaded Iraq in 2003. Under the U.S. invaded Iraq saying, we think you have nuclear weapons, so we're coming in to get them. And whether they did or not, Libya, developing a nuclear weapons program, said, you know what, we're just going to voluntarily hand over our program to you and make sure that we're not going to be on the cutting block because you raised the costs with that war in Iraq. So this is part of that sort of conversation. So if you're talking about Iran, these are the things that they want, and these would be the things, again, this is not going to be important for Iran, and this is clearly not the case for Iran. So really what you're talking about is how do you change the cost benefits on the whole thing. All right, so what we're going to talk about now, all we have left to talk about is just some key issues, some key debates surrounding nuclear proliferation. So you're going to watch a video now. It's just going to be a bunch of people talking, and that's fine. But I want you to think about some of the debates that we're going to actually talk about as we go on that are raised in this question of, is non-proliferation still really possible?